As you probably know by now, Season 2 of Loki is coming out on October 5th, which is literally right around the corner. And if you're like me, it's been a while since you've seen Season 1 of Loki, and a refresher would be very nice going into this next season. But lucky for you guys, I got all the information you need for this next season. So, needless to say, there will be major spoilers for Season 1 of Loki. That being said, in his multiverse of chaos and enchantment, the God of Mischief finally finds himself at the heart of his own story. This is a recap and analysis of the Loki show so far, a journey through time, space, and the mysteries of existence. The first episode picks up where we left off in Endgame. He stole a Tesseract and traveled somewhere, and that somewhere happens to be the Gobi Desert. Loki proceeds to strike up some conversation with some locals. However, Loki has caught the attention of the Time Variance Authority, or the TVA, who slap him in slow motion somehow and then reset the timeline like nothing happened. Loki then finds himself being processed in some facility seeming to be the establishment of the TVA, where they take the Tesseract along with his clothes and make him sign off that he did in fact say every single thing he has said in his life, while also confirming that he's not a robot. The audience then gets a look into some temporal war between the different timelines, but thanks to the timekeepers, the timelines were filtered into one single timeline, leaving the TVA to keep it that way. Loki, who has escaped his place in the core timeline, was now to stand trial for his offense. However, Agent Mobius takes an interest to the God of Mischief and gives him a tour of the vast city around the TVA, which could very well be the Quantum Realm, but we'll get into that later. The two then sit down and talk about his worst moments and of course his highlights, one of which being when he hijacked a plane with a bomb for a lot of money, and of course under the name of D.B. Cooper. Mobius then shows Loki the timeline as it should have been, with him imprisoned in Asgard and his mother getting killed. Anyway, Mobius is really just trying to get to the core of why Loki does what he does. But while they're talking, they're interrupted by the loss of one of the members of the TVA, which Loki uses as an opportunity to steal the time reversal thingy and go back to the processing area to steal back the Tesseract. Loki then realizes that the Infinity Stones have no power there, and they're literally just used as paperweights, so he should probably get comfortable where he's at. But still dodging security, he went back and looked at the events of his life as they should have been, all the way until he was killed by Thanos in Infinity War. Seeing that his destiny is just getting killed by some purple alien, he takes out his anger on Hunter B-15 by beating her in some close combat and slipping on the time collar thingy to put her in a time loop. Nowhere left to run, Loki explains to Mobius that he doesn't actually enjoy hurting people, he just does the things that he does to maintain the illusion of the trickster that he is to inspire fear and give him power. Mobius actually seems pretty sympathetic and doesn't seem to view Loki as the villain, especially because he offers Loki a job to catch a variant who has caused a lot of trouble. Mobius thought Loki would be perfect for the job because the variant is in fact another version of himself. And that concludes the first episode of Loki. Episode 2 begins in a 1985 Renaissance fair where the TVA do their usual timeline cleaning, only to be caught in a trap by the variant Loki, who has the ability to take over another person's body, causing Hunter C-20 to fight on her own only to be later dragged away in a temporal door. Meanwhile, our Loki is making himself comfortable in the TVA and loading up the information on the TVA and its technology. It would seem that there have been many variations of Loki tearing up the timeline that the TVA has actually proven out of existence. But upon investigating the attack, Loki uses this as an opportunity to spout a whole load of baloney in an attempt to inflate his value and coax them into giving him a meeting with one of the timekeepers. Mobius is able to spot the lie and the area is reset before changes lead to a cascade and then a whole new timeline. In some downtime with the boss, Mobius is able to argue to keep Loki around, as she believes that Loki is a complete waste of time. We also learn that the timekeepers are monitoring the case very closely, but also that Mobius has apparently never met them. Loki then tries to come across as useful as a means for a second chance, which leads him to be assigned to do actual paperwork for the TVA by reading over a case file of the variant that is causing all the trouble. He also tries to get his hands on the documents relating the creation of the TVA and the bounds of time itself, but those are classified. The only thing at this point that he hasn't read are the files on himself, and takes a moment to think back on the destruction of Asgard. This then gets him thinking that a time variant could do whatever they want in any sort of destructive event, because the mischief that they would do would be completely wiped anyway. Because of this, Loki predicts that the variant is hiding in an apocalyptic event to avoid the detection of the TVA. So to prove this point, he convinces Mobius to take him to Pompeii, where what would normally severely disrupt the timeline does absolutely nothing thanks to the giant cloud imminently engulfing the area. Then they take some time on a discourse of free will and the rule of the timekeepers, who are apparently very busy untangling the various timelines at the end of the existence, while the TVA tidies up day-to-day stuff. Apparently, everyone there was created by the timekeepers to do work on the timeline, and Mobius is just happy to have a purpose, although he does dream of one day having a jet ski. So they cross-referenced those candy bars that were available in areas that were about to be destroyed, which landed them in an Alabama superstore in a giant hurricane in 2050. Outside of the TVA where Loki has spent most of his time so far, magic still works, so Hunter B-15 is not going to let Loki get out of her sight. We then see what looks to be the variant Loki using enchantment to switch control between bodies using touch. Our Loki attempts convincing the other that he is still out for himself, faking his subservience to the TVA, because his overall goal is to somehow overthrow the Timekeepers, something that would work out much easier with the other variant of Loki. Meanwhile, the others are able to locate Hunter C-20 among the refugees of the storm who were doomed to die, but she is forced to give up the intel on how to locate the Timekeepers. It would also become known that this variant has been stealing a lot of TVA technology to help aid her quest. Meanwhile, Loki is battering one of the bodies controlled by the variant with the vacuum cleaner, which then leads her to reveal herself. She then uses the door technology to scatter all of the time chargers on the brink of designation, causing utter chaos in the TVA with countless new timelines being formed before their very eyes. This causes the TVA to go into emergency response, and Loki follows the female Loki through a temporal door before Mobius and the TVA can reach them, concluding episode 2. The next episode starts by female Loki implanting herself into the memories of Hunter C-20, revealing the location of the Timekeepers to her. She then heads back to the TVA as our Loki catches up when she is about to board an elevator. They then try to see if they can work together, but then they are confronted by Judge Renslayer, Mobius' boss, who is just happy erasing both of them at once. This causes Loki to use a doorway tempad to travel across time and space in an attempt to escape, landing them in pre-apocalyptic planet called Lamentis 1, that will soon be destroyed by its own moon. However, the tempad has run out of power, and Loki needs his variant other half to power it back up. She goes by the name Sylvie and realizes she can't take control of our Loki, who is keeping hold of the device. They continue to annoy each other for a little bit before Sylvie explains how Loki interrupted a plan years in the making. So, seeking a source of power, they head to the closest town, where Loki discovers that Sylvie was going to try to tear down the TVA and walk away unscathed. They then discover that there's a planetary escape ship with enough energy to power up the tempad. So they sneak onto the train, combining their powers of deception and enchantment to get on board. Once they've settled in their first-class seating, they take a moment to talk a little bit about their backstories. Sylvie was adopted and taught herself the enchantment ability, while Loki learned his powerful magic from his mother. Without much else to do, Loki does a little singing and dancing, catching the eye of the guards, leading to a fight that results with them being thrown out the window, forcing Sylvie to join him to try to get the tempad, which got destroyed in his fall. This causes Sylvie to be pretty rightfully angry, as they are now stuck on a planet doomed to be destroyed. Without any other options, they scheme of allowing the Ark to escape with them on it, even though it goes against the sacred timeline. On the way, Sylvie explains how enchanting Hunter C-20 was particularly troublesome because her memory was severely clouded, leading her to dig far into her memory before she became a TVA agent. This surprised Loki because he thought that no one at the TVA existed before the Timekeepers created them. According to Sylvie, the workers at the TVA are all timeline variants like them, repurposed for working for the Timekeepers. So they then make their way into town, which is currently being obliterated by the debris of the moon, causing chaos all around. They managed to survive all the chaos, but the Ark escape ship was destroyed before they could reach it, leaving their only option for escape gone, while also ending episode 3 on a cliffhanger. In episode 4, Renslayer goes to a meeting with the Timekeepers, and they aren't too happy to hear that both variants escaped. She then talks to Mobius, who requests to talk with C-20 to try to figure out what she meant before when she kept repeating the phrase, "It's real." Meanwhile, Loki and Sylvie are basically waiting for the world to end with pieces of debris raining down on them. Sylvie tells Loki about her first run-in with the TVA, where she was just a girl playing with toys, and the TVA showed up out of nowhere. It was actually Renslayer as a hunter, who then arrests her for her crimes against the sacred timeline. However, Sylvie was able to escape by biting Renslayer and using the tempad to get out of there. She then spent the rest of her life bouncing around from doomsday scenarios. They then talk about what it means to be Loki, and if Lokis are always destined to lose, and our Loki says that we are always destined to lose, but we always survive. Loki gets very passionate about this, which causes a huge blip in the timeline. This was just the clue that Mobius was looking for, allowing agents to go grab the variants and bring them back into custody, separated this time. Mobius then opens a portal that they're about to throw Loki into when Loki says that the TVA is lying to them, which Mobius laughs at and throws Loki in. Inside, he thinks he's in Asgard, but it's actually just a time loop of a memory of Sif calling him a conniving, pathetic worm and slapping him for cutting her hair. Meanwhile, Mobius goes to Renslayer asking if he can interrogate Sylvie while Loki is in what they call a time cell. However, Renslayer says no, saying that she is way too dangerous. She requests that Mobius just works with Loki and figures out what caused the spike. But as he walks out of the meeting, he runs into Hunter B-15, who asks him if Loki said anything while they were in there. Mobius just laughs and said he told us that the TVA was lying to us. Hunter B-15 actually found this very believable because there's something that she just couldn't shake about the Doomsday event where they found Sylvie. So she walks to Sylvie's interrogation room pretending that she will delete her, but instead she pulls out her temp pad and goes into the very same Doomsday scenario. They show up in 2050 Alabama, where Sylvie thinks she is looking for a fair fight this time, but B-15 just asks Sylvie what she saw inside her head, and Sylvie informs her that she saw memories. Meanwhile, Mobius did what he was told, starting work on his variant. He took Loki out of the time cell and started asking Loki what he meant when he said that the TVA was lying to him. Loki says that if he lets him out, he will tell him, but Mobius figures that this is just a trick. So then, Mobius questions Loki about him and Sylvie's relationship, like if he's working for her or if they are partners. Loki denies both of these claims, saying that their relationship was nothing more than a means to an end. Mobius then gets into the good stuff and asks Loki what caused the Nexus event, which Loki responds to by saying that I'm not going to tell you for you just to delete me. So since they're at a dead end, Mobius says that he will just have to put Loki back in the time cell, which Loki definitely does not want to do. So he then starts telling Mobius a complete lie that he was pulling the strings all along and that Sylvie came to him on Asgard a long time ago and convinced him to go with her to one of her apocalypses, where they eventually hashed out their plan. Mobius asks him when and what the plan exactly is, and Loki says that he isn't really ready to give away that information because he hasn't thought of it yet. He just tells Mobius that something very big is going to happen, and when it does happen, he plans to dispose of Sylvie. Mobius then says, well, we've saved you the trouble because she's already been deleted. Then all of a sudden, Loki's mood changes and Mobius lies, saying that she broke free from her time cell and killed 2 of their guards until Hunter B-15 stepped in and zapped her. Loki then tries to play it off like he isn't upset, but Mobius sees right through it. He starts cracking up and saying that he likes himself and that he is a seismic narcissist, causing Loki to yell, "Is she alive?" which Mobius responds by saying, "For now," and asks if overthrowing the TVA was always the plan. Loki says that their interests were aligned and that maybe the Timekeepers needed to be overthrown, because everyone at the TVA was a variant. The Timekeepers actually didn't create them, they were kidnapped from their timeline and their memories were wiped, memories that Sylvie can access, and before they had a life. Mobius basically just says nice try and has the guards throw Loki back into the time cell. But what Loki told him was sitting with him, and when he goes upstairs to talk to Renslayer about closing the case, he can't shake the feeling. He then asks Renslayer where she's going to put her new trophy, and as she is putting it in the case, Mobius switches their temp pads and makes an excuse to get out of there. He then goes to a quiet part of the library and sees that C-20 is in fact listed as deceased, but then comes across a video of her saying what she actually saw when Sylvie went into her brain was real, and that she had a life before she was a variant. All of a sudden, Renslayer ends it, and after seeing that, Mobius goes to pay Loki a visit. He asks Loki if he really thinks he deserves to be alone, and if he doesn't, he thinks that the Nexus event has the power to pull this whole place down. Loki is pretty surprised at Mobius saying this, and Mobius asks if he is sure that Sylvie is telling the truth, and Loki says he believes her. Mobius says that Loki was right about the TVA from the beginning, but if he wants to help save Sylvie, he has to trust him. But when they step out of the time cell, Renslayer and some guards are waiting for them. Renslayer knows that Mobius took her temp pad, and Mobius plays it off as an accident, but it becomes clear to him that the lie won't work. So then he goes back to the question, where would you go if you could go anywhere or anytime? He said he would go wherever he was truly from. But while he's talking about riding on a jet ski, a hunter prunes him. Renslayer then instructs the guards to take Loki into custody and go get Sylvie, because they're going to be pruned in front of the Timekeepers. While they're going up the elevator, Sylvie asks what her Nexus event was and if it was enough to take her life away, which Renslayer dodges at first but eventually says that she doesn't even remember. Then the doors open leading to the Timekeepers, who ask what they are going to say for themselves, which Loki responds by saying, "You really just brought us here to kill us? Do you know how many times I was supposed to be killed?" Loki then easily takes care of the other 2 guards, leaving the 2 Lokis and the Timekeepers left. The Timekeepers just say, "Hey, we can talk about this," but Sylvie throws up her sword, decapitating one of the Timekeepers. They then just slump over, and that's because they were just robots, leaving the Lokis asking, who created the TVA? Then Loki wants to tell Sylvie something, but as he's doing so, he gets deleted because Renslayer woke up and pruned him. Sylvie then disarms her and says that Renslayer is going to tell her everything. Then we see Loki waking up in somewhere that he doesn't know, asking if he's dead, when he hears a voice saying, "Not yet, but you will be unless you come with us," and there are 3 different Lokis sitting there, concluding episode 4. In episode 5, Loki is now in some variant junkyard in who knows where, but we do know that the variants there cannot affect the main timeline at all, and in fact most things pruned are killed by this giant cloud beast called Goliath. We then learn that the Loki's main goal in this prune state is just to merely survive among all the prune junk that the TVA has thrown there. Meanwhile, we see Renslayer and Sylvie are together in the TVA, where Renslayer summons a bunch of hunters after Sylvie, leaving her no choice but to prune herself to join Loki, or more accurately the many Lokis that have been pruned, and to look for answers. While this is happening, all the Lokis do some icebreakers to get to know each other fully, and we learn all the stories that they each have, but I still don't really know about the alligator. But then we learn that there's somewhat of a Loki hierarchy, with one of the Lokis trying to be a leader, leading to a huge brawl between the Lokis where some of the better ones make it out alive. Then we cut to Sylvie's point of view, where she just can't catch a break and is almost killed by Goliath. But then she is rescued by the absolute legend himself, Mobius, who is sad that he may have been working for the bad guys this whole time, and because of this he has an open mind to help her. Then we see the Lokis brainstorming a way to defeat Goliath, coincidentally just as the TVA pruned an entire battleship from the timeline, where they see just how hard it will be to defeat Goliath since the battleship got completely destroyed, causing the Lokis to rethink their plan. This is when the whole gang has a happy reunion with Sylvie and Mobius, where Sylvie believes that a better method to overcoming Goliath is by enchanting it to maybe get some answers for who's in charge. So the other Lokis part ways from our core 3, and Mobius heads back to the TVA to destroy it. Then Loki and Sylvie head off to enchant Goliath, but it doesn't seem to work. They got lucky though, because that one other older Loki uses his power to literally summon the city of Asgard to distract Goliath, buying them some time to enchant Goliath, but sadly at the cost of the older Loki who sacrificed himself. But they now had the possession of Goliath, creating an opening to an ominous citadel in the distance. In the 6th and final episode of the season, Loki and Sylvie are face to face with this building and see the whole continuity of time woven into a single timeline. The doors to the Citadel open, where they're confronted by the TVA program, welcoming them to the home of He Who Remains, but also striking a bargain saying that they will get their dream lives if they turn back, which they decline and move forward. So the program returns to tell Renslayer, but just then Mobius returns back, where we learn that the TVA employees were people pruned from their realities and memory wiped to serve the TVA, and Mobius now sees the TVA as a suppression of free will. Even with all of her anger, Renslayer leaves Mobius alive and seeks answers on her own. Meanwhile, Loki and Sylvie are confronted by He Who Remains, who actually seemed to be expecting the 2 Lokis to show up and has closely inspected all of their actions throughout the show. He is able to avoid all of their attacks because all of their actions were already foreseen by him, so there didn't seem to be much that the Lokis could do. He then reveals that before the TVA, there was actually a web of multiverses stacked upon each other, which he discovered in the 31st century as the scientist Nathaniel Richards, whose variants all reached out to one another to share their technologies. However, some of his variants just sought to take over the entire reality, causing a huge multiversal war, which sounds very familiar, but we'll get deeper into that later. But this variant found a way to harness the powers of Goliath, which was apparently created by the tears of space-time to end the multiversal war. This is where the TVA comes in, which he created to put the timeline into one streamlined version and stop the multiversal wars. Then we get a huge curveball. He Who Remains, or Nathaniel, wants to retire, and wants the Lokis to take his place, or kill him, causing the multiverse to spiral out of control again. This moment is the last moment that Nathaniel had foreseen, meaning that for the first time, he doesn't actually know what's going to happen, and it is Loki and Sylvie's decision to make. Out of nowhere, Sylvie goes in for the kill, but Loki stops her, worried that there could be interdimensional repercussions and that they need to think about it more. This causes them to fight over the decision, but both refuse to kill each other. Then Sylvie, in one last act of deception, pushes Loki back to the TVA after snagging the temp pad, and then in a fit of rage and revenge, Sylvie kills He Who Remains, whose last words are that he will see her soon. The timeline then wastes no time to start fragmenting, changing the course of events for the rest of the MCU. Loki warns the people back in the TVA that very dangerous people were just released back into the timeline, but something seems to be off. No one knows who Loki is because of how the course of history was changed, including the ruler of the TVA, who is now none other than Kang the Conqueror, concluding the last episode of the first season of Loki. Well, that was quite a bit of information to unpack, but now that we've recapped this first season, let's uncover some of the more nuanced analysis and theories that lie under the surface. And don't worry, there's still a lot to unpack. Also be aware that this part has spoilers for the latest Ant-Man movie, so if you care about that, then watch the movie before you watch this portion of the video. The first theory isn't very important to the core trajectory of the show and the MCU as a whole, but I still thought it was a cool idea to bring up. This theory is about the TVA's location potentially being in the quantum realm, likely linked to the events in Ant-Man Quantumania. This aligns with the introduction of Kang the Conqueror as the villain of Quantumania and the mid-credit scene showing various Kang variants forming a council akin to the comics. Quantum Realm also has many parallels to the location Limbo in the comics, which was the place the Kings congregated and carried out most of their time travel, which may be expanded upon in the future of the show. On the topic of Kang and his relation to the show Loki, we see that in the ending of Loki, He Who Remains is talking about the many variants of himself, meaning that the events of Quantumania and beyond were probably caused by Sylvie killing He Who Remains and branching the timelines, freeing the dormant Kangs. This connects to Kang's apparent demise in Ant-Man Quantumania because there's a strong possibility that he might still be alive, given his significance in the comics as the main antagonist and the fact that faking his death would actually make sense to give him time to regain sources after the events of Quantumania and rise up against the other Kangs. The mid-credit scene of Quantumania actually gives us a lot of information on these other Kangs, because it shows the three leader Kangs, likely Immortus, Ramatut, and Scarlet Centurion from the comics, ruling over the Council of Kangs. Another minor theory is brought about by seeing the parallels between Kang the Conqueror and He Who Remains, because we basically know that He Who Remains is at the very least a variant of Kang, considering that they are played by the same actor, but more notably, these variants specifically are against the other Kangs. I mean, He Who Remains actually completed the exact goals that Kang the Conqueror sought to complete in Ant-Man, suggesting that Kang the Conqueror is actually destined to become He Who Remains, bringing a whole nother layer to the Kang connection to Loki. Anyway, the mid-credit scene ends with the Kang army starting a war against the main Earth, likely setting up the events of the next Avengers movie, Kang Dynasty. And that's the majority of the information we get from the mid-credit scene of Quantumania. But in the post-credit scene, we get a direct connection to Loki because we see Loki and Mobius spectating a conference of Victor Timely, another variant of Kang who traveled to the early 1900s and who's talking about time and some kind of machinery he was working on, which is pretty well corroborated in the Marvel Comics. Loki and Mobius seem to be trying to track Kang down and were led there, likely being the starting point of Season 2 of Loki. As we transition to the Season 2 trailer, we see Loki undergoing a process called time slipping, and a scene where Loki and Mobius are investigating the events tied to Victor Timely, once again setting the stage for the newest season, likely exploring the repercussions of Sylvie's actions and the ongoing multiversal disruptions. Combining these theories, we see how Loki's story intertwines with the broader MCU, particularly the rise of Kang and the imminent multiversal chaos, paving the way for an exciting narrative and crossovers in the Marvel Universe. And that's basically everything you need to know going into Season 2 of Loki, which will be coming out tomorrow. I hope this was a good refresher and got you into the right mindset to go into the next season of Loki. If there's anything you noticed that I missed, please let me know in the comments and leave a like if you enjoyed because I worked really hard on this video. With that, thank you for watching and I'll see you in the next video.